The air inside the tunnel grew colder as Daniel pushed forward, the alien child clinging to his side. Her tiny fingers were locked around his arm, trembling, but her grip was strong, almost as if she knew letting go meant the end. Every sound echoed here, the soft thud of their boots, the distant rumble of collapsing buildings above, and the occasional hiss of steam escaping from broken pipes. Daniel's body screamed for rest, but he couldn't stop. Stopping meant being caught. They had been running for what felt like forever, but the faint glow at the end of the tunnel promised an exit. Daniel's heart pounded faster, not just from exhaustion, but from the weight of everything that had happened. He had made his choice. He had given up his own guaranteed escape to save this child. There was no going back now. The ground shook violently, dust falling from the ceiling. The girl's eyes widened, and she pressed her face into his shoulder. "It's okay," he whispered, though his voice was hoarse. He didn't know if it was really okay, but she needed to hear it. He needed to believe it. As they neared the light, a shadow appeared at head tall, armed, and blocking the way. Daniel froze. His body tensed as the soldier stepped forward, weapon raised. This was no ordinary soldier. The armor was sleek, black, and marked with symbols Daniel didn't understand. The alien child whimpered softly. The soldier's visor tilted slightly, studying them. Daniel knew he couldn't fight. He had no strength left, but he could protect her one last time. Slowly, he set her down behind him and spread his arms wide, shielding her with his body. "If you're going to shoot," he said quietly, "do it to me. She's just a kid." There was silence. The soldier didn't fire. Instead, he lowered his weapon. Then, to Daniel's shock, he took off his helmet. Beneath it was not the face of an enemy, but one of the child's own kind. His features were softer, his eyes filled with something Daniel had not seen from any alien soldier before. Compassion. The child peeked from behind Daniel, her eyes lighting up. She said something in her own language, her voice trembling with hope. The soldier's face softened even more. He replied in the same tongue, his voice gentle. Daniel didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. The soldier stepped aside, pointing toward the exit. "Go," he said in accented human speech. Daniel blinked, unsure if he heard right. The soldier gave a small nod, as if to say, "You've done enough." They ran again. The cold tunnel air shifted to warm sunlight as they emerged into an open valley far from the battle. For the first time in hours, Daniel could breathe without fear. The girl released his hand and ran toward a group of her people waiting in the distance. She turned once, smiling a small, pure smile that carried all the gratitude in the world. Daniel stood there, watching her disappear into safety. His legs felt weak, but his heart felt lighter than it had in years. He had no ship, no supplies, and no clear way home. But he knew one thing for certain. He had made the right choice. In a galaxy filled with war, greed, and cruelty, a single act of kindness could still matter. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to change more than one life. Daniel turned away from the valley and started walking, not knowing where the path would lead, but carrying the quiet knowledge that today humanity had earned a little more hope. The ramp was right there, so close that Daniel could see the scuff marks from boots, the scratches in the metal from years of missions. The ship's engines roared louder now, rattling the air, sending waves of heat across the ground. The blue glow lit the smoke like a storm in the clouds. Soldiers at the top of the ramp waved their arms, shouting over the deafening noise. "Come on, cross, move." Daniel didn't waste his breath answering. His lungs were already burning from the sprint. Every muscle in his legs felt like it was about to give out, but the sight of that ramp pulled him forward. The girl was clinging to him tighter than ever, her small fingers digging into his vest, and then a sharp, sizzling blast tore through the air beside him. A plasma bolt hit the ground to his left, sending chunks of concrete flying. Another shot slammed into the metal wall to his right, spraying sparks. The enemy had a clear line of sight now. Daniel didn't dare look back, but he could hear them footsteps pounding, weapons charging, their harsh voices calling out in their alien tongue. The sound was too close, far too close. One more shot hit just behind his heels. He felt the heat burn through the back of his boots, and instinct made him lunge forward, even faster. The ramp began to rise. No. Daniel's voice tore from his throat, in a raw, desperate shout. Hold it. Hold it. The soldiers at the top froze the mechanism for a second, their faces tense. One of them leaned over, rifle in hand, firing into the smoke to give Daniel cover. He pushed harder, every step feeling heavier than the last. The weight of the girl, the gear, the exhaustion, it all threatened to crush him, but the thought of her being caught, taken, or killed lit a fire in his chest. Halfway up the last stretch, an alien soldier broke through the smoke, sprinting straight toward him. Daniel's instincts kicked in. He shifted the girl to one arm, pulled his sidearm with the other, and fired 3 times. The shots hit center mass, the enemy collapsing in a flash of sparks and smoke. But the pause had cost him seconds. The ramp was rising again. He reached the base of it, his boots slamming against the metal. With a final ragged breath, he threw the girl upward. She landed on the ramp, sliding a few feet before a human soldier caught her and pulled her to safety. Daniel leaped after her, catching the edge of the ramp as it lifted higher. His grip slipped for a second, his glove scraping against the cold metal for one terrifying heartbeat. He thought he was going to fall. Then 2 sets of strong hands grabbed his arms, hauling him up with a grunt. He collapsed onto the ramp, his body trembling, lungs gasping for air. The hatch slammed shut behind them with a heavy metallic thud. The ship shuddered as it began to rise. Daniel lay on the floor for a moment, staring up at the dim lights above, his chest rising and falling in uneven bursts. The noise of battle was fading now, replaced by the deep hum of the engines. The world below was slipping away. The girl crawled to his side, her small hands pressing against his arm. She was breathing hard too, her silver eyes still wide. But there was something else in them now, something softer. Trust. A medic knelt beside them, scanning her quickly with a handheld device. She's stable, the medic said, glancing at Daniel. What the hell happened down there? Daniel didn't answer right away. His gaze was fixed on the girl. She was safe. That was all that mattered. Outside the small viewport, the city was shrinking, the fires looking like scattered embers in the dark. In a few minutes, it would be gone from sight forever. Daniel knew he had only barely made it. 1 second slower, 1 step less, and they'd still be down there. But they weren't, and that was enough. The street to the evacuation point was a straight path, now straight, but far from safe. The open space between him and the docking bay felt like a killing field. Fires burned on either side, lighting the way like torches in a nightmare. The distant glow of the human ship's landing lights shone faintly through the smoke. A beacon that meant life. Daniel shifted the girl higher in his arms. She was quiet now, her head resting against his shoulder, but he could feel her heart pounding. It matched his own, fast and unsteady. Then he heard its shouts in the alien language. Close, too close. He risked a glance over his shoulder and saw dark figures emerging from the smoke. For soldiers, their armor gleaming with that unnatural, black glass sheen, their weapons already raised. The red targeting beams cut through the haze, crisscrossing over the rubble like hunting lines. Daniel's instincts screamed, "Run!" He broke into a sprint, his boots striking the ground in harsh pounding rhythm. Plasma bolts hissed past him, slamming into walls and sending chunks of stone flying. One blast hit so close it seared the air beside his head. The girl flinched, burying her face in his neck, her grip tightening as if she thought she might fall. "Hold on," he shouted, his voice raw from smoke and exhaustion. He darted into the shell of a collapsed building, weaving between jagged steel supports. The soldiers' heavy footsteps followed, growing louder. He could hear their weapons charging for another volley. Daniel ducked through a broken doorway and burst into another street. This one sloped downward, toward the docking bay, and he could see the outline of the ship more clearly, now its engines, glowing faint blue against the dark. Its ramp still lowered, but it was still far, too far. The cum crackled again. The officer's voice, sharp and final, "Cross. We're leaving in 90 seconds. Get on that ramp, or you're done." He didn't bother answering. A plasma blast hit the wall beside him, showering him with hot fragments. The girl whimpered, and Daniel's chest burned not from the heat, but from the thought of her getting hurt. He pushed himself harder, feeling the strain in every muscle. His breath came in ragged gasps, his arms aching from holding her for so long. The sound of the soldiers' footsteps grew fainter for a moment, then sharper again. They weren't giving up. Their voices carried through the smoke, barking orders to one another. Daniel knew they wouldn't stop until either he was dead, or they had the girl, and then another danger. From the side street ahead, a second squad appeared, blocking the direct route to the ship. They moved fast, weapons up, the glow of their visors locking onto him instantly. Daniel's mind worked in overdrive. Straight ahead was death. Backward was death. There was only one option, a narrow service passage between two crumbling buildings to his right. It was barely wide enough for him to squeeze through, but it was cover. He darted toward it, his boots skidding on the rubble-strewn ground. The soldiers shouted, firing as he vanished into the passage. The shots hit the walls behind him, sparks chasing his heels. Inside the passage, it was dark, the air heavy with dust. The girl coughed against his shoulder, and he whispered, "Almost there, almost." The passage twisted sharply, and for a brief moment, the noise of the battlefield faded. But the clock in his head didn't. He could almost hear the countdown each second, a hammer striking the inside of his skull. When he emerged, he was on the last stretch to the docking bay. The ramp was still down. The ship's engines were louder now, the blue glow brighter. He could see human figures at the top of the ramp, soldiers waving frantically for him to hurry. But behind him, the enemy was still coming. Daniel shifted, the girl in his arms, lowering his center of gravity, like a runner at the starting line. Every part of his body screamed in protest, but his mind was already fixed on one thing, that ramp. There was no room for doubt, no room for fear. He ran, through the smoke, through the burning light, through the chaos of a dying city. He ran with everything he had left, because if he stopped now, they both died. The sky was a burning wound. Ash drifted down like black snow, covering the shattered streets of the alien city. Buildings that once reached for the clouds now lay in twisted heaps of steel and stone. Fires roared in the distance, sending columns of smoke into the blood-red horizon. The ground trembled every few seconds from explosions far away, reminders that the battle was still raging somewhere beyond the ruins. Sergeant Daniel Cross ran through the chaos, his boots kicking up dust and broken glass. His lungs burned with each breath, the air thick with smoke and the acrid bite of plasma burns. His rifle was slung across his chest, useless for the moment. He had no time to fight now. Every second counted. The human evacuation ship was leaving in 7 minutes. 7 minutes to cross half a city under enemy control. 7 minutes to make it home. His orders were clear. Survive. The war was already lost here. This planet, once full of life and trade, would be nothing but rubble by the time the last human ship left orbit. His squad was gun-scattered, dead, or already on the ship. Daniel was alone, and he planned to keep it that way. No distractions, no heroics. The sound of distant blaster fire echoed between the broken buildings, sharp and cold. Somewhere above, a low hum vibrated through the air. The alien drones scanning for survivors. Daniel kept to the shadows, ducking between collapsed walls and burnt-out vehicles, his eyes scanning every corner. He told himself not to look at the faces of the dead lying in the streets. Some were human, most were alien. In death, they looked the same, dust-covered, still, their eyes staring at nothing. A faint memory rose uninvited. His sister Emily, waving goodbye the day he left Earth. She was standing in the rain, smiling through tears. He pushed the thought away. There was no time for memories now. The streets narrowed as he approached the old market district. Once, this place had been loud and full of life, alien merchants calling out prices. Human tourists wandering wide-eyed through the stalls. Now it was silent, except for the occasional creak of metal cooling in the evening air. Then he heard it, a sound that didn't belong here. Not the whine of plasma fire, not the crunch of rubble under his boots. A cry. It was small, trembling, almost lost in the whisper of falling ash. Daniel froze. He turned his head toward the sound, his pulse quickening. It came again, weak, afraid. He followed it to a narrow alley between two collapsed buildings. The walls here were scorched black, and the air was even heavier with smoke. His boots crunched on shattered glass as he stepped inside, and then he saw her. Under a twisted sheet of metal, a small alien child struggled weakly. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old in human terms. Her skin was pale silver, glinting faintly in the dying light. Her eyes large, luminous, and filled with terror locked on his as soon as he appeared. She spoke, her voice soft and shaking. The words were in her language, strange and musical, but Daniel didn't need a translator to understand. She was begging for help, for someone to save her. Daniel's heart tightened. He looked down at his watch. 6 minutes. His mind screamed at him to turn away. He could still make it if he ran now. If he stayed, if he even tried, he'd never make the ship. And even if he freed her, she might not survive. This world was falling apart, its air poisoned, and its people hunted. But her eyes, they were the same eyes he'd seen in refugee camps back on Earth. Eyes that knew fear too well. Eyes that still clung to hope, no matter how small. Daniel cursed under his breath. He could hear his commanding officer's voice in his head. You can't save everyone, Cross. Sometimes you have to let go. But he couldn't. Not this time. He stepped toward her, brushing aside the ash that clung to his gloves. Hold on, kid, he said softly, though he knew she couldn't understand. The war could have his life if it wanted it, but it wouldn't have hers not if he could help it. And with that, he dropped his pack, planted his boots in the rubble, and gripped the beam, pinning her down. The street ahead was a graveyard of steel and stone. Twisted metal beams jutted into the air like broken bones, and chunks of shattered buildings lay piled in uneven heaps. The fires burned lower now, leaving a thick haze of smoke that made every breath taste like ash. Somewhere far behind, the muffled thump of artillery shook the ground, a grim reminder that the city was still dying. Daniel moved as quickly as he could, his boots slipping on loose rubble. The girl clung to him, her small arms tight around his neck, her head tucked under his chin. Her breathing was fast, uneven, like she had run a marathon without moving her legs. Every muscle in his body ached. His arms burned from carrying her. His legs screamed from the constant sprinting. He could feel the weight of his gear digging into his shoulders, but it wasn't just his gear. The real weight was in his arms. It wasn't the girl herself. She was light, far lighter than a human child her age. The weight was what she represented, a promise, a decision he could never take back. His cum crackled again, the voice of the evacuation officer harsh and impatient. Cross, you've got less than 2 minutes. If you're not here when that ramp closes, we're gone. No exceptions. Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't, not while every breath felt like fire in his chest, and every step took him closer to the line between life and death. As he rounded a corner, he froze. Up ahead, a collapsed wall blocked the street completely. A thick slab of concrete lay across the road, too heavy to move. To the left was a narrow gap, just wide enough for a man to squeeze through if he stripped his gear. To the right was an open alley, but he could hear movement there. Heavy, deliberate steps. Enemy soldiers. Daniel's mind raced. He couldn't strip his gear knot without leaving behind weapons and supplies, and the alley. That was a death trap if they spotted him. The girl stirred in his arms, her eyes opening just a little. She looked at the blocked street, then at him, her gaze steady, despite the fear in it. She didn't speak, but something about the way she looked at him gave him the push he needed. He went for the gap, twisting his body sideways. He slid in, holding her tight against his chest. The jagged edges of the rubble scraped his armor and tore at his sleeves. The air in the gap was thick with dust, making it hard to see. He pushed forward, step by step, ignoring the pain in his shoulders and legs. Halfway through, his pack snagged on a piece of rebar. He cursed under his breath, struggling to pull it free. The girl pressed closer, as if trying to make herself smaller, her small fingers gripping the fabric of his vest. Finally, with a sharp yank, the pack came loose. He stumbled forward, emerging into another ruined street. The space was quieter. Here the sounds of battle muffled by the collapsed buildings around them. He allowed himself a single moment to catch his breath, leaning against a wall. The girl looked up at him, her silver eyes wide and searching, as if she could see the exhaustion written across his face. "It's okay," he whispered, more to convince himself than her. "We're almost there. Almost, but not yet." As he started, moving again, the ground suddenly shook a nearby explosion. Dust rained from above, and a distant building groaned before collapsing in on itself with a roar. Daniel tightened his hold on her and picked up his pace. His body felt like it was reaching its limit, but his mind refused to slow down. He had made his choice, and there was no turning back. Every step was heavier, but every step also meant she was closer to safety. He thought about his sister again, about how he had failed to protect her years ago. Maybe saving this child wouldn't erase that failure, but maybe it could mean something. Maybe it could mean he didn't always have to lose the people who needed him. The evacuation point was close now. He could almost see it in his mind. Ship waiting, the ramp down, the chance to get out alive. But deep inside, Daniel knew something. The hardest part wasn't getting there. The hardest part was making sure they both got there in time, and the clock was still ticking. The metal beam was heavier than it looked. Daniel wrapped his hands around it, his gloves scraping against the cold, scorched surface. He pulled once, nothing. He pulled again, harder still, nothing. His muscles burned, and sweat mixed with the dust on his face. The girl whimpered beneath the weight, her small hands trembling as they tried to push from underneath. She was so small. Up close, Daniel could see the delicate ridges on her skin, the faint shimmer of silver as if she was carved from moonlight. Her breaths came in short, shallow gasps, and each time she inhaled, she made a soft, pitiful sound, half pain, half fear. "Stay with me," Daniel muttered, even though she didn't understand the words. He didn't know why he was talking to her. Maybe it was for her. Maybe it was for himself. The beam was wedged under a chunk of wall, locked in place by layers of debris. Daniel let go for a second and looked around the alley. Pieces of rubble, scorched market stalls, the broken frame of what had once been a doorway, nothing useful. He needed leverage. Then he saw it, a half-bent metal rod lying in the dust. He grabbed it and jammed it under the beam, pressing his weight down to pry it up. The beam shifted an inch. The girl gasped. Her eyes locked on his, and in that instant, there was no fear, only hope. He pulled harder, his shoulders screaming in pain. Inch by inch, the beam rose. "Come on, kid, crawl out," he shouted, motioning with his head. She hesitated at first, staring at him as if unsure this human stranger wasn't just another soldier coming to hurt her. But then she wriggled forward, her thin body sliding free from under the crushing weight. The second she was out, the beam slammed back down with a deep, metallic thud. Dust swirled around them, and Daniel coughed, pulling her close. She was lighter than he expected, barely more than a bundle of bones under fragile skin. Her breathing was fast and uneven, and her clothes were torn in several places. Suddenly, movement caught his eye at the far end of the alley. Shadows flickered between the rubble. The enemy. They were here. Daniel's stomach tightened. He slung his rifle off his shoulder and peered down the street. 3 figures in dark armor moved toward them, their alien weapons glinting in the firelight. Their helmets hid their faces, but Daniel could feel their gaze locking onto him. He had 2 choices: drop the girl and run, maybe making it to the ship in time, or carry her and fight his way through, knowing it would slow him down, maybe cost him his life. He looked at her again. She was watching him with wide eyes, gripping his sleeve tightly, her small fingers curling into the fabric, as if letting go would mean death. The choice was already made. Daniel scooped her into his arms and bolted toward the nearest street that would take him back to the ship. The sound of the enemy's shouts filled the alley, and plasma bolts exploded against the walls around him, showering them both with sparks. The girl buried her face in his chest, clutching him like she could hold on forever. Daniel gritted his teeth and ran harder, every muscle in his legs screaming for him to stop. He turned a corner, ducked behind a collapsed wall, and set her down for a moment. She was trembling, her breaths quick and sharp. He reached into his vest and pulled out his water canteen, pressing it into her small hands. "Drink," he said softly, guiding the canteen to her lips. She sipped, coughing once before drinking again. More shouts echoed nearby. The enemy was splitting up, searching every street. Daniel knew he couldn't stay here. He picked her up again, his arms aching but steady. Her small head rested on his shoulder now. Even in the middle of this nightmare, she was trying to trust him, and that trust weighed heavier than any beam he had just lifted. He checked his watch. 5 minutes left until the ship left the ground. If he didn't reach it in time, both of them would be stranded. As he started moving again, weaving through the broken streets, Daniel thought about how many soldiers would call this a mistake. But looking at the fragile life in his arms, he didn't care. Some mistakes were worth making. Daniel's boots pounded against the broken pavement, each step sending jolts of pain through his legs. The child clung to him tightly, her small arms wrapped around his neck as if she were afraid the world might tear her away. Her skin was warm, but trembling. The voice in his earpiece crackled again, sharp and urgent. "Cross, where the hell are you? 4 minutes until liftoff. If you're not here, you're gone." He didn't answer. What could he say? "Sorry, I stopped to pick up a child from the middle of a war zone." Command wouldn't care. Orders were orders. Get out alive. That was it. But Daniel knew the truth. If he had left her behind, he would never stop seeing her face. Those wide silver eyes, that look of pleading, that fear. It would follow him back to Earth, haunt him in his sleep, rot him from the inside. He could live without a promotion. He could live without a home. But he couldn't live knowing he had abandoned her. The street ahead was a mess of rubble and fire. Metal beams jutted out at strange angles, casting jagged shadows in the dim orange glow. He spotted a narrow path between 2 fallen towers and moved toward it. Halfway through, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the far side. Daniel froze, pressing his back to a wall, holding the girl tighter. She looked up at him, confused, her breath warm against his neck. The footsteps grew louder. Alien soldiers, 2 of them stepped into view, scanning the area with their rifles. Their armor was black and smooth, reflecting the flickering firelight. They spoke in short-clipped bursts of their language, their voices cold and mechanical, through their helmets. Daniel's mind raced. He couldn't fight them head-on, not with one arm holding the child, but he couldn't stay here either. Slowly, he lowered the girl to the ground and crouched in front of her. "Listen," he whispered, knowing she couldn't understand his words, but hoping his tone would tell her everything. He pointed to a dark gap in the rubble behind them. "Hide there. Don't move until I come back." She stared at him for a moment, then shook her head violently, clutching his arm. Her eyes glistened, and she made a soft, pleading sound. "I'll come back," he promised, forcing his voice to stay steady. "I swear." He pried her fingers loose, gently guiding her toward the hiding spot. She crawled inside, her small frame disappearing into the shadows. Daniel pulled a loose sheet of metal over the opening, just enough to keep her hidden without trapping her. Then he moved, keeping low. He circled to the right, stepping over beams and piles of stone as quietly as he could. The soldiers were still, scanning the opposite side of the street, their rifles sweeping slowly. Daniel pulled his pistol from its holster and took aim. 2 shots quick, precise. The first soldier dropped instantly, armor sparking as the plasma burned through. The second turned sharply, but Daniel's third shot hit center mass, sending him collapsing into the dust. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel waited a second, scanning for movement. Nothing. He hurried back to the hiding spot and pulled the metal sheet aside. The girl was curled up tightly, her hands over her ears. When she saw him, her eyes widened in relief, and she reached for him without hesitation. He lifted her back into his arms, and she clung to him as if she feared he might disappear if she let go. 3 minutes left. The evacuation point was still, blocks away, and every street between here and there was enemy territory. His muscles ached from carrying her, his breathing ragged from the constant sprinting. But there was no stopping. As he ran, he thought about how easy it would be to explain her away if they made it say she had information, say she was a prisoner of war, say anything to justify her presence. But the truth was far simpler. She needed someone, and he had been there. Daniel shifted her slightly so she could rest her head on his shoulder. She was still trembling, but her grip had eased just a little, as if she was starting to believe he could actually get her out. The clock was ticking, and the odds were bad. But Daniel didn't care anymore about the odds. He was in this fight until the end, no matter what that meant.